We are back, and we are finally gonna get our bottle vase trimmed using the chuck that we made in the last video. So let's go ahead and finish this series by finishing this vase. So to get this going, we need our chuck that we made, our vase, and then a wad of clay is optional. And we're going to go ahead and center this on first, then center our vase upside down in here, and then we're going to trim like we normally would. So we're going to put this on the side, and the first thing we're going to do is get this centered. All right, and to get the chuck centered, we're going to do the water tension technique to get it stuck, so we don't need to wad it down. So you're going to get your damp sponge, wet the metal wheel head, and wet the bottom of your chuck to get it wet. Then you're going to put it on top of the metal and start moving it around. You'll start seeing slip develop, and the more you move it, the harder it will be and the more resistance you'll feel. So we're going to kind of get it to a pretty resistant movement, so it's really hard to move. And we're going to try to center it as best as possible using the rings and the edge as our reference. Then we're going to spin the wheel, and we pick where we want to center it based on the rim, the middle, or the base. I recommend the rim because that's where we're going to be putting our piece inside. So I like taking my finger, resting my hands against the splash pad or my legs, and I let the wheel spin while it touches my finger. The point that touches my finger is the most off-centered section, so I'm going to stop it when it gets to that off-centeredness or where it touches, and I'm going to push it away from me. So gently nudge it away, and depending on how much water, how thick the clay is at the base, it might be really hard to nudge. But try your best to nudge it a little bit, and then spin and recenter. So right there, it's getting a little closer. Once again, every time it touches, find the part that touches and nudge it. So the closer to center, the less you push it. Right there, looks pretty centered. Inside looks pretty centered. And this is ready to receive the vase putting on top. So last thing I want to do, gently tap it down so I get it really stuck, or I can just push my hand down and jiggle, and then make sure it looks centered one more time. And if you want to be extra careful, you can get your clay wads and secure it to the wheel head at this point as well. Now that this is centered, we're going to grab our bottle vase, flip that upside down, and now we're going to center this piece based on the bottom or the middle section. So the first thing I like doing is try to kind of position it as centered as possible. And then I'm going to spin the wheel. And then just feel where it may be off-centered. Now the hard thing about trimming on a chuck is when you center your piece, you're not moving it front or back or left or right. You're tilting it front, back, left, or right. And so that can be a little difficult if your chuck isn't centered or this is a little off-center. So you just got to really get some practice in, and you need to let go of perfection a little bit to get this perfectly centered. So what you can do is I take my pointer finger and I basically choose a spot on where I want it to center based off of. This is slightly off. So I'll go right here, and this would be at my 6 o'clock. I'll go right here, and every time this touches my finger, that is the point that is the most off center. So I find where that is. So right there. And then I would tilt that and push that away from me ever so slightly, and then I spin again. Okay. The other option you can try is you get a stick that is flat, preferably not a lot of clay on it, and you put it on the rim, and you spin it, and you look at it at eye level, and you check to see if it teeters up or down. And wherever it teeters, if it's high, let's say this side is high, then we would shift it and lower it on that side. The last way to try to center it, instead of using here as your reference, you use the rim. So you put your finger on the rim and you feel where it touches. Wherever it touches, that is the part that you have to tilt away from you. So right there is the high point. So I'm going to shift that in front of me, and then I'm going to gently pick it up and tilt it this direction, so away from me, and I'm going to repeat. So you can either find where it dips or where it rises. So this is where it dips now. So instead of pushing it away from me, I'm going to lift it towards me a tad bit and then spin. So right there, that feels pretty centered. I'm going to go ahead, tap it down, make sure it still feels pretty level. And if you are confident, you could trim it as is. But what I recommend for your first time trimming with the chuck, take a coil, roll it into some skinny wads. So I usually use 2. And then I take that wad and then I pinch the top to make it tapered, like the blade of a knife. And I take that, one hand on top, take the middle section of the wad and I just push it into the groove where the vase meets the chuck. I do that all the way around. And then I rotate it and repeat on the opposite side. So like I said, this is optional. Because the chuck is still workable clay, it has some tackiness and it will stick to your piece. But this is a little precaution you can take just in case you feel like it might move on you. Okay, I'm going to squeeze a little harder. Okay, and then spin the wheel. Okay, still feels pretty flat. And one last thing I'm going to do to prevent trimmings from flying everywhere is I'm going to put a piece of material around the splash pan so that the trimmings hopefully stay within that tube. So I have this old laminated poster board. It was the schedule for our school. We no longer use that schedule. But I'm basically creating a little tube here so that when I spin the wheel, all the trimmings will fall into here, hopefully, and not everywhere else. So this is one thing I do recommend. And if the plastic touches the metal, you're gonna hear that scraping. So what you can do is get some tape and then tape these to the splash pan so they open up. Or you can try to flare them out a little more until they fit. So I'm gonna go ahead and play around with this and then we're gonna go ahead and get this trimmed. All right, so I used paper clips to clip the 2 ends and they're not touching, but if you hear the scraping, you don't really mind, you don't really need it. But now this is more or less ready to start trimming. So the first thing that I like doing is trimming a little pilot hole in here so that I can apply downwards pressure as I trim. So the downside of having these are your hands are gonna be elevated. So you just gotta be a little more anchored. So my elbows are floating. So I'm trimming this intersection, this little indent, and that will allow me to put my middle finger or ring finger to apply downwards pressure as I trim. And so the first thing I'm gonna work on is this outside bump. I want to remove this little bump here. So I take the round side and I'm just removing that unevenness. And you can use whatever trimming tool you want. And that flaking is the trimmings getting stuck. So I just move that. And I'm going to switch to my bigger trimming tool now to kind of even it out. And because this piece is so tall on the chuck, I can really feel it shake a little bit. So I gotta make sure not to apply too much inwards pressure as I trim, or this thing can pop off and shift on me. So I'm trying to get this into a nice orb. So I'm really gonna bring this bottom section inward. And you can trim the bottom however you want. I'm not going to be doing a foot on this one. I'm going to do a more of a concave bottom because I do like this round curve here. So whatever you want to do for your piece is personal preference. The goal of this video is to show you how to use the chuck. And so this part of the trimming is more or less the same as you always trimmed. It's just a little more finesse because it's elevated on this obnoxious clay cylinder. And then my left hand is anchored against the trimming tool for increased stability so that the odds of this piece flying off are a little less. There we go. So that looks like a pretty nice bottom. I'm going to go ahead and clean it up a little bit with this larger trimming tool. So this will take off a little more of the unevenness that I don't want. Pardon the bell ringing. Take a little more off from the bottom. And it got a little rough, but that's fine. And now I'm going to go ahead and work on the top, or in this case, the bottom. And because I don't want to trim an actual foot, I'm just going to trim down and then concave it into a little crater. Tap for thickness. And now I'm going to float my tool. And I want to be careful not to apply too much outwards pressure. So the first pass, I'm actually just trimming downwards and I'm removing a little bit of this ring. Because from my experience, sometimes if you apply too much outwards pressure, this whole thing pops off. So instead, I'm just removing a little excess for now. And then once that bottom section is kind of removed and it's a little more even, I can now go ahead and do a sideways pass with very, very light pressure so that I'm not applying too much outwards pressure and hopefully it won't pop the piece off. If you want to see more ceramic videos, don't forget to like and subscribe. That way it helps grow the channel and you'll be able to see these videos as they're released every week. Check for thickness. Looks like I can go a little deeper. This time I'm going to switch to my bigger trimming tool. So I really got to be mindful not to apply too much pressure. And the bottom is still pretty soft because I did torch this dry rather than let it dry naturally. And the reason why I chose a concave bottom versus a traditional foot is this shape tends to match my orb a little more. And because I'm not having a foot present, in this case visually seen from the outside, I just want to take a little clay off the bottom to lighten the overall piece and just to make it a little more finished. Okay, that looks pretty good. And now let's move on to the final steps, which is burnishing and smoothing. So I'm going to add some water with a sponge. And two ways to burnish. One is just you add water and then you use your fingers to apply light pressure to remove all of the excess water, and that pushes all the particles, that grog, that sand material back into the clay body, and it makes your trimmed area nice and smooth. So right there looks good. The second option is you use a rib that's not as dirty, so make sure you take off all that clay, and you use this to apply pressure to where you want to smooth. So you still apply water. The only difference now is you use this just like a trimming tool and you're applying light pressure and you're scraping off that top layer of water, and that will reveal a nice smooth surface. So whatever you have, some people prefer the rib, some people prefer their fingers. I use whatever is available. And if needed, I can burnish the parts that are in the chuck as well. Use my fingers to do a final smoothing. And usually I prefer my fingers because it's just easier and faster. But sometimes if the clay's really dry or groggy, this can kind of be a little rough on your fingertips. All right, that looks good. Last step before I pop it off is to get my stamp on it. Don't want to push too hard because I don't want this to concave the middle. And then let's take these papers out. finally the wads. Okay, to pop it off, make sure your hands are dry, give it a light jiggle, and then it should release. And then at this stage, you have a few options. You can work on the top where you need to, the rim, whatever else, or you just get it dried out and then you can get it to fire and get ready for glazing. So for now, I'm just gonna put this on the side and I gotta get this thing popped off. Because I wanna reuse it, I'm gonna remove all the trimmings that are in the way and I'm just gonna try to pull it towards me. Now when I pull, I gotta pull very lightly because I don't want it to warp. So if I pull towards me and it doesn't move, I can kind of rotate the wheel and try to pull again. So let's go ahead and try to pull gently. There we go, starting to release. And then I can kind of rotate the wheel to pull in different directions until that slip is more or less removed. Right there, and it released. So now, this, you have a few options with this guy. You can either wrap it up in a plastic bag and then spray water in it and keep it in that state so you can reuse this. 2, put it in a damp box so that you can just keep it in there and reuse it if you have a damp box. Or 3, fire this to bisque and then you can fire it again to glaze temp so that you have a permanent chuck. Now I don't recommend the third one because I'm not a biggest fan of trimming on fired chucks, but I'm gonna try experiment with this one, fire it and put glaze on it and see if that makes it a little easier. But anyway, we're just gonna put this away for now. And here is the final outcome, our bulb vase. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to watch this video and the series. And I'm really excited for the next video series to come out. And so if you want to see those when the videos are released, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps to grow this little channel and helps me produce more content for you guys. And as always, if you want to see anything specific, let me know in the comments. And thank you for watching as always, and I'll see you in the next video.